It's time for the finishing touches on my Sock It To Me cardigan from Lois Weaver that I wove in my handspun yarn and then sewed together what feels like ages ago. As I suspected, I needed to let it just kind of, I don't want to say fester, um, lie fallow for a while I figured out what to do with the last bits. So I have reached the stage where absolutely everything is done. The bottoms are hemmed. I opted not to try to fill in this empty space here with any embroidery. I'm just going to do it as is and chalk it up next time yeah, Deb, if you're going to try and do some kind of edge design, make sure you line up the pieces before you sew the shoulder seams, because it will just look a lot better. It'll look a lot more professional. To me, this is always the sign of a store-bought plaid shirt or something sewn by a sewist who doesn't understand how to match plaids. But like I said, live and learn. So all the bottom hems are hand sewn, and then I did a line of machine stitching just to hold everything in place. Actually, they were all hand basted, which I strongly recommend you do anytime you are planning to do some visible sewing on hand woven fabric. Hand based things carefully. Don't just rely on clips. You want every single speck of this hem to be locked into place before you take it to your sewing machine, because the sewing machine is going to stretch things out on the bottom where the feed dogs live, unless you are using a walking foot. And I can never seem to remember to grab my walking foot before I'm going to sew on hand woven fabric. So this is all done. I could wear it next week if the weather cooperated, except that I have to finish the neck edge. So this is my last conundrum, is what I'm going to do with this neck edge. So on the back, I opted to just do some top stitching, but on the front, that's not going to work, because if I just fold it over the way I have on this back, uh, and finish the zigzag edge and fold it over and then top stitch it, every time I wear this, the top is gonna, this top corner on both sides will flop open and it will not look good. So I created this problem for myself. Lois Weaver's design actually has you sew, uh, it has you fringe the tops of the front and sew them so that the fringe edge becomes a design element. Uh, you just sew the fronts over the top of this back edge, and the fringe is just about an inch, half an inch long, and it's a design element. But I'm not really a fringy person, so when I made this first one ages ago, I finished off the back just like I did on this purple one, which is to say that I zigzag stitched and then I just folded under and top stitched probably somewhere. And then on the two fronts, I zigzag stitched and then I single crocheted. Oh, I trimmed the ends as close as possible to the zigzag stitching. And then I finished this whole thing with a with single crochet, uh, all the way down the front, up around the neckline, and then back down the other side of the front. And I was really happy with this look, except I just, I don't love having these open edges. And I will probably spend the rest of my life, every time I wear this, being a little nervous of the fragility, because uh, I spent a lot of time on this, and shoulder seams are just difficult. They're awkward, And if this were a round seam, it would be even more worrisome. Um, you can see on this purple one that the shoulder areas where I seamed things together, there's a little bit of pulling. So I can opt to do the same thing I did on the first one, which is where this fold is, uh, which tells me that my two fronts are the same length, which again is another mark of a poor sewing job, is if the two fronts are not the same length. I could just uh, work a line of machine zigzag stitching just below this fold and then trim very close to the line of the zigzag and do the same um, crochet stitch that I did the first time. I would still have this not very attractive issue in the back of the raw edges hanging out. And since I'm someone who, when I sew anything, any article of clothing for myself or any purse, I line the heck out of everything because I just don't like having raw edges. On a hand woven project made from hand spun yarn, I'm going to be even less likely to appreciate that approach on this garment. So uh, I still haven't decided. That is one option. Another option is this is a strip of sari silk ribbon that I bought in a great big roll on Etsy, and I might choose to hand stitch or machine stitch. I seriously haven't decided. Uh, this edge all the way around the neck, but it's going to get a little dicey at the neck, at the shoulder seam is the problem. Um, but like I said, I could choose to stitch this in a 1/4 inch seam, then press it and fold it backwards. Here, see if I can find my needle. There we go. Okay. Okay, so this won't be a perfect approximation, but it'll give you an idea of how this binding approach would work. Okay, so imagine that this needle is the seam, and this isn't going to work terribly well because it's not going to hold everything in place. So I would match the raw edge to the top of the edge that I want to bind, machine stitch it, then fold it over, and on the wrong side, fold under. There we go. Fold under where I want the binding to end, and then I would just, with very tiny hand stitches, stitch this down. But like I said, that turn at the shoulders is going to be a real problem. And so I would need to come up with a different solution. What I could potentially do is just bind the top at the fronts, which is the part that you really, really see because of the way they flop open, and then grab on the inside, just stitch down. You basically use the another length of this sari ribbon as a way to hide this unsightly trimmed off area, and not even bind it, but just basically cut it in half lengthwise, or actually, instead of that, press under each edge by quite a lot so that I've got maybe a 1/2 inch wide folded iron strip, and just tack that down along the back neck edge, and it would completely hide this unsightly looking area where I have raw ends poking out of my hand woven fabric. So why isn't this, and I could even choose to run this all the way a 3/4 inch or ½ inch binding along the tops of the shoulder seams. So again, when you're when you're sewing hand woven fabric into a garment, you have this huge advantage. Let's see if we can get a better look. Whenever you're seaming selvages together. So this side and this side were two selvages seamed together because the length of the fabric was only about 17 inches wide. And I've got no problem leaving this seam as is. It is perfectly stable. In fact, it's probably more stable than any other part that I sewed on this garment because it's the selvage. When I did the side seams, again, they are selvage edges. And in fact, this part and this part at the vent, I didn't even touch those because they're selvage edges. They are going to be fine. And when I got up to the armhole, I pressed under just once and then top stitched on the right side, and you can't even see it. You can barely see the top stitching. But again, I'm not worried about this edge in the slightest. However, the shoulder seams and the neck opening are where I had to cut the length of my fabric. And I just do not ever, ever, ever like leaving edges unfinished like this. So I'm kind of talking myself into doing the binding to be visible from the front on the two fronts, but then using lengths of it to bind off where the seams are so that I don't have any of these raw edges. Yeah, I zigzag stitched it. I sure did. I zigzagged the heck out of it. I went over twice. But the longer these little guys are hanging around, the more nervous they're going to make me over time. And so maybe, so this is a not, I still have to crack on this lovely design that makes beautiful little simple wraps from handspun yarn or commercial yarn or whatever else you want to use. Yeah, I'm gonna have to keep thinking about all this. And in a future video, you will get to see what I ultimately chose. Another reason to go with the binding is this sari yarn is just stunning. It would just add this little je ne sais quoi to a very lovely garment. It's one of those finishing touches you never ever want to skip when you are spending all this time making something handmade. Think about the ultimate finish and you'll be very happy. So that's it for now. I'll show you what I decide once I make those final decisions.